How's it going, guys? Kevin Clear here with The View from the Pew. Today I want to touch on something that became a bit of a news item at the beginning of this week. This is the first full week of March 2016, and on Sunday, Cardinal Thomas Collins, who's the Archbishop of the Diocese of Toronto, made a statement regarding doctor-assisted suicide or euthanasia. Okay, he requested that all Canadians who hear it, and especially all of the Catholic people in his diocese, oppose the federal government's plans to move forward with making doctor-assisted suicide legal. Okay, so that's the thing that I want to comment on. Now, let me warn you right up front, I'm not going to say a whole lot. There'll be another video on this eventually, but I'm not going to say a whole lot about my particular view of this issue. Okay, what specifically concerned me the most about the whole discussion was the way in which it happened. Okay, there are a couple of things here that I want to raise as concerns about society as in general, and to make you aware of as a viewer, okay, to help you realize the situation that we find ourselves in Canada in 2016. Okay, so number one, the Cardinal suggests that as a culture, let me give you the two main statements that got attention. Number one, he said, as a culture, as a society, we have not thought through this plan thoroughly. And I think what he's trying to drive that at with that suggestion is that we haven't realized all of the implications of this decision. And I think he's correct about that. And I'll come back to it in a second, because I actually kind of, even though I agree, I also disagree in some ways. The other statement that he made that got a lot of attention was that there's a difference between someone dying, that is, allowing nature to take its course and the body to cease living, and someone being killed. Okay, one is an act pursued by another. Now, even though it's voluntary, it's still being killed. Okay, and the other is, of course, letting nature run its course. Now, that statement again, I kind of agree with, but it's how people responded to it again that I want to deal with in this video. So let me first address the primary comment that he made, which was, there was a Maclean's article that addressed this, and in the article, they pointed out a number of people disagreed with his statement that our culture, our society, has not fully thought through this issue. Okay, let me suggest otherwise. Okay, even though in some ways I agree, I don't think they've realized all of the implications. I think they've already committed to an ideology that demands a certain response to this issue. Okay, so our society is generally recognized to be a secular democracy. Okay, we've already decided that as a society we're going to live and act as if there's no God. Now, some people may want to believe in God individually, but as a country, we're going to pretend like there's no God, even if, you may be a politician or a lawmaker who believes in God, but you have to make laws and behave as a politician as if that's not the case. Okay? So we're a secular society. Now, the implications of that directly impact this issue. Okay? And in fact, in a secular society, you would expect to see this issue play out exactly as it has. Because in a secular society where there's no allowances for a God, all life is just life. Okay? Human life specifically is devalued. Human life is no different than the life of your pet bird or dog, or even the life of the spider you squished this morning. All right, from a secular standpoint, life is just life. And so making court decisions that devalue human life, that don't attempt to protect it, that makes perfect sense. Okay, and in fact, you would expect in a secular society that you would kill anyone who is inconvenient or problematic, because human life is not that valuable in a secular society. Now, you may say, but Kevin, most people, even if they're fully secular, they value human life. Yeah, but that's a holdover to the Judeo-Christian roots that we have in this country. Okay? if they purely lived out their philosophy, they would find that they have no basis on which to give human life a higher value than other life. Okay, so that's the first. So that's why I suggest, in fact, as a society, we have thought this through. Okay, we've decided to be a secular society, and as a secular society, all life is devalued. Human life especially is devalued. Okay, now there are other implications for that we haven't started to deal with yet. Implications regarding human rights, which have no basis in a secular society. Implications regarding things like slavery or prostitution or pedophilia and child abuse. Those issues, although right now they're high on the list, in a purely secular society, those issues move way down the line because humanity is not highly valued. Human life is not highly valued and to be protected. And in fact, humans aren't even all equal. Okay? So, all of those things are implications that will eventually come up if you insist on being a purely secular society. Now, let's take the next step, okay? And this step, again, is something that was raised. So this one didn't get much attention in the whole discussion, okay? The Cardinal said, hey, we haven't thought this through. I'm suggesting if as a society we've committed to a secular view of the world, okay, then in fact we have thought this through. This issue is kind of already decided because it's a necessary outcome based on a commitment to a secular worldview. So now, let's look at another necessary outcome of that, and here's one that did come up. In this whole discussion, the Cardinal made his statement, and a radio host that I was listening to said this. He said, okay, so the Cardinal feels strongly about this, and this is what he thinks about this issue. But what if there are others who feel differently, who feel that there is no difference between killing and dying? Okay? Now, he didn't elaborate much on that other than to say, what if, and in fact suggest that there are others who feel differently. Now listen to that carefully. His argument is this. If there are others who feel differently, then you can't suggest that this is right or wrong. Okay? You know, the Cardinal's saying this is wrong based on this. And he said, but there might be people who don't feel it's wrong, and so how can the Cardinal insist on his view over someone else's? Now, you realize what that radio host has done is removed this discussion from an objective discussion based on facts and reality and moved it into a subjective discussion based on feelings and opinions. Okay? And guess what? In a purely secular society, all moral issues fall into that second category. So we end up with, by necessary implication, moral relativism. Okay, in a purely secular society, there is no standard, there is no basis on which you can say, this is absolutely wrong and this is absolutely right, and someone who thinks this is thinking the wrong thing, and someone who thinks that is thinking the right thing. You can't do that from an objective standpoint. You can only do it, okay, in a subjective way. And so the very most you can appeal to is, well, most people feel that this is wrong. Okay, so right now, most people feel that slavery is wrong. Most people feel that rape is wrong. Most people feel that murder is wrong. Most people feel that senior abuse is wrong, that theft is wrong. Okay, but what if in 15 years in Canada, most people don't feel the same way about those things? You see, in a secular society, there's no basis to say, no. Theft is morally wrong for all people all the time. I don't care what anyone thinks. That kind of a statement can only be derived from something greater than humanity and can only come from the position of a theist, that there is a God who created the world and we're all beholden to the standard that he sets for humanity. Okay? Without that appeal to a divine creator, we are left with moral relativism. Okay? So we have not, so in that sense, okay, I agree with the Cardinal that no, Canadians haven't realized where the path they're on eventually goes. Okay? So that's the first thing that I wanted to deal with that as a culture, if we've decided to be a secular society, there are necessary implications that come with that. And if you're not willing to deal with those necessary implications, then you need to rethink committing to a secular worldview. Now, the next thing that comes is the form that the discussion took. Number one, there was a presupposition in all of the discussion that I heard, okay, that this cardinal was simply representing a religious standpoint. Okay. Now, the reason I keyed in on that is because, of course, number one, I'm a preacher. Number two, I listened to what he said, and he didn't argue, or he didn't try to convince people of his way of thinking by appealing to his authority within the church, by appealing to the sacred books of Catholicism, the Bible, or any other, creed or catechism or anything like that. He didn't use any of those religious authorities to make his case. Okay? But people didn't care. They said, look, since he's a cardinal, his view has got to be a religious view, and since religion is a subjective matter, it doesn't really matter. We're not going to care about it. Okay? Now that puts anyone of faith in a difficult situation, okay? Because I have opinions about politics, I have opinions about morality, I have opinions about responsibility, about child rearing, about any number of subjects that are somewhat based on faith, but about which I can speak intelligently and about which I can formulate opinions from a secular perspective, okay, based on science and fact and sociology and psychology. Okay, when we bring those things to bear, they may point us in a particular direction in a moral issue. So what, child rearing. Does the Bible say some things about child rearing? Sure it does. But have I also considered, and would I also suggest certain behaviors or to avoid certain behaviors or to adopt them based on, let's say, psychology or psychiatry or sociology or just plain experience? Yes. Okay? I would bring all of those things to bear. To suggest that someone who is a member of the clergy, or in my case a preacher, I hate that idea of clergy. I know the Catholics would call it that. That's why I use the term. But it's not legitimate to just say, well, that's a religious opinion, so I don't have to respond to it. Okay, that's not an argument. And so what happened in the discussion is no one, or very few people, even tried to respond to or rebut the arguments that he made. They just said, he's a priest. Okay? That's not good reasoning. Okay? That's not good critical thinking. All right? And I could do the same thing, and I don't think an atheist would appreciate it if an atheist put forward an argument, and I just said, well, he's an atheist. Like, obviously, what he says is based on atheism, and I don't care about it. Right? That wouldn't be legitimate. I wouldn't have answered his argument in any way. Okay, so from both sides, we need to deal with the facts. We need to deal with the logical, reasonable arguments that are asserted, and either show them to be false, or if we can't show them to be false, then I guess we have to believe them. Okay? Now, finally, there was no attempt in general to speak critically or reasonably about this. In fact, a lot of callers just called in and said, hey, that's his faith, and you can't question someone's faith. And other people said, and if a doctor feels strongly about this, or a nurse feels strongly about this, or an individual, well, because that's their faith, you just let them go. And I'm like, wait a second, I don't think that's right? That's not legitimate. The reality is there's a right and a wrong answer to this question, or there are right and wrong guidelines that need to be adopted, and that's where we need to be focusing our attention, not on saying, just everyone think what you want and do what you want. Okay, that's not a healthy way for a society to function. Because once you adopt that on this particular issue, what are you going to do with other issues that come up? Because, boy, we get in a really difficult spot if we started saying that about all kinds of different issues. I feel like the speed limit here should be 95, not 100, and someone else feels like it should be 135. Well, everyone just do what you feel is right about that. Yeah, that won't really work, right? Further, what became apparent the longer I listened to this discussion was that it was almost as if we've abandoned the ability to think through an issue. And I can tell you that I've had a couple of other experiences that kind of betray this as a culture. I talked to some young kids, some high school students, about the recent election. And literally what they did was parrot, word for word, what their teachers had told them. Okay? And that's partially a failing on the teacher's part. Okay? The teacher should have said, look, these are the relevant issues and you have to think these things through yourself. Rather than, well, this is what so-and-so says and this is why it's right. Yeah, no. Okay? But on the other hand, it's also society's fault. We need to be better at saying, look, don't just believe what you're told. You have to examine the world in which you live. When someone says, and this is a really common one right now, well, science says, scientists say, that no one should be allowed to say that ever, unless you know what scientists and what study and what the results were and what the data points were that were used. Don't say science has said. Okay? But we do it all the time, and we don't critically examine the things that we hold to be true. In fact, I have, as a preacher, I have people give me books, say, this is the greatest book I've ever read, you really need to read it. And I read the book, and even if I agree with the general statement of the general premise of the book, a lot of times it's a book, it's not well argued, they haven't proved their points, they haven't backed up what they're saying with any kind of real empirical data, either, if it's a Bible subject, they haven't backed it up with the Bible, they haven't backed it up with anything, right? They just said stuff. And the fact that someone read that and thought it was great tells me that person is not thinking critically and thinking carefully about what they believe and why. Okay? In fact, I would go further and say that even many adults, okay, we're not outside of a high school or even university setting. Sometimes university is even worse than high school. But even adults will parrot, when asked about something, what they've heard on a TV, what they heard a politician say, what a newspaper reporter editorialized about. And in my way of thinking, that may be helpful if you're sharing, this writer used this argument, and that's how he proved his case. Hey, that's legitimate because you're at least identifying an argument. But usually that's not the case, okay? They just say, well, this will happen, and this and this and that. And you could see that play out on any number of issues. All right, so those are the things that concern me most about this whole discussion. Okay, so let me reiterate as we close. Number one, the direction that we're going as a society. We have not realized the implications of being a secular society, but we're getting there, and I kind of fear to think about how Canada will look in 30 years. Because if you adopt a purely secular mindset, it literally opens a floodgate on moral and ethical issues. Okay. Number two, we need to learn to deal with facts and figures. Okay, we need to abandon this idea that faith is purely a subjective matter, because the reality is it's not. Not all religions are made equal. Not all beliefs are equally legitimate. Okay, some are based on history and fact, and others are purely made up. Okay, and so we need, even in religion, we need to bring objectivity back into the equation. Okay, further, in general, we as a society need to learn to think critically. To look for, when we read an article, hey, what point is this individual trying to make, and how does he actually prove that point is true or untrue? Maybe he's trying to disprove something. Well, that's fine too, but how is he disproving it? Is he actually making an argument, or is he just spouting a bunch of gibberish? Okay, that maybe sounds really nice, or maybe makes an emotional appeal, but has no basis in fact or reality. All right. So there you go, guys. Those are my concerns that arise out of this discussion of doctor-assisted suicide that came up this week when Cardinal Thomas Collins made his statement about that. And I somewhat agree with him, and I somewhat disagree with him. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, but that's the view from the pew.